Okay, for this video, I'm going to go over some of the common items that can cause delays on the DED review. So you can see here that I have pulled open the cost certification form, and I'm on the EXP form tab. So one of the common issues that can kind of delay the project and kind of cause some back and forth is vague descriptions of the expenses. So you can see here, we tried to add a little bit of kind of note on here to describe that in a little more detail and to highlight if there are any non-qualified portions of the expense. So for example, if the expense is split like this, with $1,000 being qualified and $1,000 being non-qualified, we would just want to make sure that there's a note over here identifying what this $1,000 non-qualified portion is. And there needs to be enough detail also, that we can see that will show that this amount is qualified. And again, keep in mind, since the proofs of payment documents and invoices and everything else are not being sent in anymore, it makes this more imperative that this column right here is more detailed. So that's one thing that can kind of slow down the project review from our end. And then, of course, if you don't have detail on that, make sure to reach out to the contractor, and they should be able to provide a little more detail or refer to the invoice or receipt for detail there. So the next item that can kind of slow down the DED review process is if there are a lot of expenses that are being paid by third parties, third-party payers that aren't the applicant. So that's kind of the intent of this column here, is to note any of those. And just for reference, the HTC program does require that the applicant entity pays for expenses. The only exception to that is if the sole member of a single member LLC entity is paying for expenses as well. But other than that, basically, the applicant needs to be the one paying for expenses. So if you are going through the review and see a lot of that, make sure to move those over to non-qualified. Otherwise, that could potentially slow down the review and cause more questions and that sort of thing as well. The next item that could potentially slow things down or cause issues would be the calculations for profit, overhead, and the developer fee. So just make sure, of course, I went over in another video that we are now requiring the breakout sheet for this, and definitely take a look at that video for more details on how to fill that out if needed. But make sure that the amounts that are being claimed for those soft cost fees are under the allowable caps for the program guidelines. And it's pretty detailed on there, how to calculate that and what's allowed. But that's another thing that could potentially, cause the DED reviewer to have to move that over and slow down the process a little bit. Moving on here. So, of course, one of the big things is making sure that the actual costs are eligible, of course. So making sure they're appropriately classified over here in these two columns. And we did provide a tab on the cost certification form that lists the various kind of examples of what might be qualified or what might be non-qualified. And really, like, the key here is this isn't necessarily all-encompassing. So if there are any questions whatsoever about a particular cost that may not be listed on here, and it's not 100% clear, make sure to reach out to DED, and we're more than happy to, kind of give additional guidance on that. But one thing we do see, pretty regularly is things such as rooftop decks or new additions, enlargements, exterior concrete work, and that sort of thing that's included in the qualified category. So all that stuff, since it's exterior work, is actually considered non-qualified under the HTC program. And again, there's kind of some examples about, interior work being on the qualified portion of this, and then the, any of that exterior expenses, exterior structures, enlargements, all that sort of stuff is listed down here on the non-qualified. But again, if there's any, ever kind of question about a particular expense, make sure to reach out to DED, and we're happy to kind of point you in the right direction there. And then kind of the final item that can cause a lot of issues too with the project reviews and delay things a little bit is with the incurrence date of expenses. So we often do see some expenses that are claimed as qualified that are actually outside the allowable period for soft costs or hard costs. So just make sure to go into the guidelines there and ensure that this incurred date right here, which can be found on the invoice or the receipt, is within the allowable time frame depending on the cost. And again, hard costs and soft costs have kind of different timing rules there, so make sure to refer to the guidelines on that. And beyond that, again, if there's ever any questions about any of these items, definitely feel free to reach out to us. You can definitely reach out to the redevelopment@ded.mo.gov email address, or reach us by phone at 573-522-8004. Thanks.